Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and today we have some exciting new patch notes to take a look at. Class tuning incoming October 8th. As we've now completed the first 3 weeks of the War Within Season 1, we have enough data and feedback on class performance to allow us to do a broad pass on outliers in dungeons, raid, and PvP play. With scheduled maintenance in each region, we will make the following adjustments. I'm going to zoom in. Let's zoom in a little bit. Yeah. There. Bang. Death Knight. Sand Lane. So 5 changes to Sand Lane here. Sand Lane notably already got a big set of changes a couple weeks ago. They buffed a bunch of the Sand Lane stuff for both specs, and they're doing it again, but just for blood. So not Unholy Sand Lane, just blood Sand Lane. Vampiric Strike damage increased by 30%. Infliction of Sorrow now deals 20% of the remaining disease damage when it extends, was 15, and deals 130% when it consumes, was 100. So buffs there to both of these effects. Visceral Strength, 12% for 12 seconds, was 8% for 8 seconds. Also, that's quite a big buff, right? Like, in terms of total expected amount of strength, 50% more strength for 50% more duration. Those are multiplicative with each other, so that's a lot more strength. That's like double power. Frenzied Bloodthirst now increases the damage of Death Strike by 6% per stack, was 5% as well. So overall, they're trying to make Sand Lane competitive. I like this. I like them. Basically, anytime there's a spec where you're just 100% of the time playing the one hero talent tree, I think it's good to just keep delivering these sorts of buffs to the other one until it's being played as well. I think that is a really good thing to aim for if you're happy with the power level of Deathbringer Blood, which I think you can be. Deathbringer Blood is in a pretty good place. Okay. Up next, we have Havoc DH. Aldrachi Reaver, Wounded Quarry increased by 100%, Warblade's Hunger 100%, Reaver's Glaive 15%. Now, Reaver's Glaive is the main source of the damage from Aldrachi Reaver. These are smaller sources, but these are still some moderate buffs to Aldrachi Reaver. This is maybe a spot where I would disagree with myself from a few seconds ago, and I would say, Aldrachi Reaver is probably a lot less fun to play for most Havoc DHs than Fellscarred, so maybe until we're ready to rework that and fix that, let's just leave it being weaker. So that's maybe one case where I disagree with that. But I mean, that's a personal preference thing. Maybe there are people out there that do like Aldrachi Reaver. Vengeance, they're buffing the effectiveness of Mastery. Now, Mastery for Vengeance is still in a pretty weird spot where it only gives you value against some incoming damage. And it's still like pretty weak point for point, even so that if you buffed it by 20%, I think it would still be a pretty bad stat. But this is still a buff for Vengeance. You do still get some incidental Mastery. I don't think this is going to be enough to make Mastery a good stat or anything, though. Shattered Souls healing per soul increased to 7% of recent damage taken, was 6. And Soul Barrier base absorb value increased by 50%, and absorb value per soul increased by 100%. Okay, so some small buffs to Vengeance here. The Shattered Souls healing, up to 7 from 6 looks small, but that's actually a decent amount as well there. I think that this is pretty good. This is a spec that definitely could use some buffs. I don't know. I feel like instead of buffing, maybe in addition to buffing Mastery, you could just buff their baseline armor value as well, or even stamina. Those are both things that I think Vengeance could use a little bit more of. All this talking about patch notes, though, has really got me kind of thirsty, which brings in today's sponsor of this video. It's Pure Kick drinks. Yeah, hydration and drinks and stuff, and they're partnering up with Warcraft Rumble as well. So if you buy some, you can get codes for Warcraft Rumble stuff, which I got sent some of those, and I got sent some of it too. So here, you want to see? Here's one of the codes. You can have this one if you're fast, if you're one of the first people. If it zooms in, if it focuses in, there you go. There's one of the codes. One of the reasons to be here early for the videos. But yeah, let me make myself one of these real quick. Okay, step 1, it says. Step 1, fill the bottle with water. I guess this is a glass tumbler thing with water. Step 2, I've got my blueberry stick thing of it. And then I've got my water. Okay, logistically, it was hard to be holding this and open it, but I have now done that. And then that goes in. Whoa. You guys see, I guess it's kind of reflective, huh? You can see the patch notes reflected in the screen there, but look at that. It's all going in. Now I have to mix it. Okay, now it's all mixed up, all mixed together. Got a lot of electrolytes and stuff, which are good. He's got a good. That's nice. All right, yeah. So check out the link. Thanks then again to them for sponsoring this video. Now with my thirst quenched, let's continue. Feral Druid. We've got Wild Stalker. Chance for Bloodseeker vines to grow on a single target is unchanged, but slightly increased when Rip and Rake are on multiple targets. So a Wild Stalker AoE buff. Bursting growth damage increased by 10% as well for Wild Stalker, so slight buffs to Wild Stalker for Feral Druid. Druid of the Claw was the predominant one for M+, at least, so I like seeing this getting buffed. Resto, for the third patch notes in a row, we have all healing increased by 5%, does not affect PvP combat. It's the third patch note in a row where all healing is being increased, although I think they've chosen like 6, 5, and 4% over the past few. And then Sen Ward as well specifically is getting its healing increased by 40%, so that's a tank healing or spot healing increase on that talent. If it's talented, which I'm not even sure if they currently were, but 40% is a lot. 5% on all healing. Let's just take a look at some stats here from the raid. Yeah, I mean, it's getting close. I get like 5% more, I guess. Well, yeah. One problem is that nobody's playing it in Mythic as well right now. Like, yeah, I guess there's still a decent chunk of parses with it in Mythic. I'm actually surprised to see this many people are playing it. That must be mostly the early bosses. What happens if we choose, like, if we just look at Brood Twister onwards? So on Brood Twister, we have 7 Resto Druids and 146 Prez Evokers. Wow, look at that Holy Paladin, though. That's a spec that definitely needs a nerf down there. And then Nexus Princess. No Resto Druids by the time we get to Nexus Princess. But then once you get back to Olgrax, there's a decent chunk of them. It's more popular even than Mistweaver or Disc, which are kind of just less, Mistweaver in particular, historically less popular than Resto Druid among kind of the broader player base. And yeah, you can see Resto Druid, an outlier on the low end. Does a 5% healing buff catch them up? Well, we could take this number and we could add 50,000, and it would still be less than this number, which is the second lowest number. So maybe not, but maybe there's also some effect of people have rolled off of Resto Druid, and if you buff it enough, people will come back to it. That like the good Resto Druids out there that are now being good to other healers instead. I don't know. This spec needs. I want to say it needs help that's not just aura buffs, but it is definitely true that if you aura buff them enough, then they'll be good. Evoker. Blistering Scales grants allies 20% of your armor, was 30%. So this is a M+ focused nerf to Evoker, because the Blistering Scales armor is particularly useful if you're trying to push high keys and your tanks are perishing to auto attacks, which they are. Blistering Scales is a huge part of the value proposition offered by Evoker that's outside of their damage. Blizzard has done a lot of nerfing to different parts of the Evoker kit that are basically the value they bring that's not their damage, and this is another one of those that is aimed predominantly at M+, which I think is a good place to aim at it, because in Raid it's now fine. Evokers were used in the Race to World First on some bosses, but not on all. They're being used by some guilds, but not by all on most fights. They work particularly poorly on Queen Ansarek, but that's kind of like a fight design issue for them, and also just a good fight for dev. But I think that I think the spec is now in I want to say it's like in a healthy numerical place for Raid, although I'm not sure if it's in a healthy playstyle place yet for Raid. Whereas an M+ is definitely still very, very strong, very, very good for enabling your group to survive, enabling your tank to survive, and this does take aim at that. Now, there's another school of thought here that's like, okay, these high keys are only fun when they are survivable, which they are only when you have an Evoker. So this nerf is going to make tanking high keys less fun because you always have an Evoker, and so this is just nerfing your survivability. My counter to that is that they should just like buff baseline tank armor then, or nerf mob auto attack damage or something, so that everybody can do those the high keys without needing the Evoker, right? Like if you could do the high keys with an Evoker and only with an Evoker, I think that's a problem. Now, it's not 100% true. Like, there are groups doing high keys without Evokers, but they're definitely very good in that context. And I think this is a good kind of nerf to target that without further hammering the spec into feeling bad for people just using it in regular, normal raid content, heroic raid content, weekly key content. pushing +7s with your guildies. Those are the sorts of cases where you're not going to feel this as much. This is like particularly targeted, I think, at the super high keys. Dev Evoker, Flame Shaper is being buffed by 25% on Consume Flame, but Engulf is being nerfed just in PvP combat. So this is good. Flame Shaper Dev is not good. Flame Shaper tree sucks for Dev, and buffing it to make that less true is good. When I say a tree sucks as well, I'm not even sure how far behind it was. I just know that it was sufficiently behind that you didn't play or really consider it, right? So, you know, there is actually functionally a huge difference between something being, say, 50% behind and 5% behind. Like, that's actually huge for if you know, like for a lot of players out there. For me, that doesn't change. Like, I'm always going to play the one that's ahead, even if it's, you know, 5% ahead or 50% ahead. But if you're kind of a more normie player, a more casual player, it's very important and very good for Blizzard to try and narrow that gap. And even if it overtakes, right? Even if Flame Shaper then actually becomes 2% better, that's fine as well, as long as it's not 20%, 50% better. Prez Evoker, on the other hand, Flame Shaper is getting nerfed. So Engulf healing is going up by 20%, but Consume Flames healing is being reduced by 50%, which is the main part of the Prez Evoker ramp. If we again look at, say, some logs here, let's look at Nexus Princess, because that's a hard fight. And we look at healing. You can see, look at my guildie here. He got, so Consume Flame itself did 32.3% of his healing on this fight, and Engulf did 1.4% of his healing. So the Engulf is going to be increased up to 1.7% of his healing, but Consume Flame is going to get taken down to 6. So basically this is like a 15% nerf to this healing here. Now, you'll note that there's a lot of overheal on this ability, so anytime you're nerfing an ability that has a really high average overheal, that might be just a case of like, yeah, it's still going to top people, right? It's just not going to overheal by as much. So I think Prez might still be fine out of this. Like, this is a mythic boss encounter. It's post-nerf, but it's still a pretty high amount of damage that this boss does. And this ability in particular was still doing an absurd amount of overheal. So, I don't know. I'm not enough of a healing expert to know whether this is, like, sufficient to nerf Prez Evoker, whether it's, in fact, enough to be, like, doomer about Prez Evoker, or whether this is, like, doesn't actually do anything because it was all overheal. I don't know. It's good that they're trying to nerf Prez, though, because the spec, again, if we go back to rankings on this boss for healing, you have to go down 16 slots to find a non-Prez Evoker, right? That's tough. Okay, Hunter, BM. Basilisk Collar damage bonus per damage over time effect is being reduced to 2 and 4%. Was 5 and 10%. There's actually quite a large nerf to that side of it. But kill command and pet damage are being increased, so this, I think, is AoE buffs and single target nerfs to BM, or like single target compensation. Compensation nerf, so this is mostly just going to buff their AoE, I believe. But I'm not 100% sure on that. Serve Hunter, which, by the way, this spec desperately needs help with AoE, because it doesn't do any. Serve Hunter, so the 2-piece is being buffed, now increases wildfire bomb damage by 8, was 5, and the 4-set is being buffed as well, 20% increased damage on targets affected by bomb was 10%. So pretty large buffs here to these Serve set bonuses, although the set bonuses for Serve, like for most specs this tier, are pretty small in magnitude. All right, Mage up next. We have some hero talent changes. Frostfire is being buffed. Frostfire Bolt, 15%. Frostfire Infusion, 50%. Frostfire Empowerment, 60%, was 50, so, 20% buff to that. And then Frost Mastery now grants 2% Mastery, was 1% Mastery. That's a pretty large effect as well. I know that neither Frost nor Fire played Frostfire. I don't know if these are enough to make that not be true. I know Mage had some of the most lopsided hero talent differences where, like, Sun Fury was far enough ahead of Spellslinger, unless you were doing some really funny stuff, that it was like, a chasm, right? And I think Frostfire was far behind the other options for its 2 specs. So I don't know if this is enough to help with that, but again, even if it's not, it's good that they're moving it in this direction, especially if they're willing to keep coming back and doing these changes again until it's close. It doesn't have to become the meta choice, but it does have to get to a point where somebody who picks up the game and is like, oh, cool, I want to play Frostfire Mage. We want to lower the chances of that person going into a group and getting laughed at for their hero talent choice, right? Like, we want it to be something where it's like, oh yeah, that one's maybe a little bit worse, right? But like, you know, it's fine. Versus, you know, sometimes you're coming in and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm doing no damage, and there's a hero talent tree that could do like 40% more damage, and everybody looks at your damage meter and is like, huh, you know, where is Exterminate on your damage meter if you're, you know, trying to play Sand Lane, right? Oh, that's weird. That's weird that that's not there. So yeah, I think this is good changes. I don't know enough about Mage to know whether it's enough, but even if it's not, it's good. Monk, Master of Harmony, Stored Vitality now causes additional 40% healing damage. Was 25. And then they're further buffing Master of Harmony specifically actually for both. So Coalescence now causes Aspect Harmony to increase damage and healing taken by 20%. Chi Wave and Chi Burst deal 100% increased damage, was 50. Overwhelming Force increase to 20 was 15. And Balanced Stratagem increases damage to 5% was 3%. Now, Master of Harmony was already a consideration for Brewmaster, although Shadowpan generally was the preferred option. So I think this is good. It's, you know, I personally, I like the Shadowpan playstyle on Brew, but I've definitely, you know, one of the things that was nice was like, oh, they're both close. I can just play a Shadowpan always, and that's like fine, right? But now I feel like I probably should learn what Master of Harmony does and be able to choose between both of them, which I think that is the ideal place for hero talents to get, right? Like for Bear, for instance, Lunar Bear and Druid of the Claw. You can just learn either and just play one, but for a min-max player like myself, if I'm playing a Bear for any serious content, I want to learn both and understand both. And I think this is probably enough to move that to be true for Brewmaster as well. And that's really good. If we can get all the hero talents or like half of them to that point, I think that's going to be really fun, because what we want to be true is we want it to be so that people can just play one if they want, but good players feel like they have a reason to learn and master both. And that adds a lot of depth to the game. Mistweaver, they're also buffing Master of Harmony here. Coalescence now causes Aspect of Harmony to increase damage and healing taken by 30%. I assume this is a buff. It doesn't say what this number used to be or if this number used to exist. So, you know, maybe this is a nerf to this specific effect. It's something I should have looked at. Aspect of Harmony now stores 30% of healing done, was 20% as well. And then finally, Windwalker's actually getting a buff as well to the non-Shadowpan option here, Conduit. Celestial Conduit now scales its damage with Mastery hit combo. Now, you don't have an awfully large percent next to your Mastery number currently, but still, that's good. And yeah, Windwalker was another one where you probably wanted to be familiar with both hero talent trees, and this will help even further that be true, because Shadowpan is the more kind of easy default one. All right, Holy Paladin. All healing reduced by 5%. Now, this has struck several in my guild as out of touch. Holy Paladin, by some metrics, right, does pretty well. So if we look at like overall statistics for healing, Holy Paladin is in second place here, right? But obviously, I guess we can't look at, there's not public logs yet for Queen Ansarek. If we look at Ansarek on Heroic, it definitely starts to fall off. And if we look at some fights, like if you look at Brood Twister Mythic, like Holy Paladin is laughably bad at this fight, and so I don't know. I feel like it's a spec where this is maybe a little bit misleading. Like, it's definitely a fine healer spec, but it's like pretty much like this is a pretty firm 5 spec middle of the pack in my opinion. And I feel like 5% to Holy Paladin, nerfing them maybe takes them out of that middle of the pack and dunks them down into bad tier. Like Holy Paladin is something where there's an argument basically in my guild of like, should we be sitting our Holy Paladin on any of these fights? And we decided against it, but it was probably a mistake on Brood Twister not to. And then on future fights now, I mean, our Holy Paladin is one of the best players in our guild, right? Like if we looked back at the healing rankings for Kaiveza, let's switch this to healing. There he is, right? Rank 1 Holy Paladin healer there. And we're considering benching this person. I mean, not seriously. We're going to play him probably even after a 5% nerf, but like, man, that sucks. So this one, I don't know, this is one of those changes that I think, this as well combined with the Prez healing nerfs, I'm a little bit worried about whether we will be able to heal Queen Ansarek Mythic. I don't know, that boss does a lot of damage, and it was kind of carried in the Race to World First by the fact that you had 2 Preservation Evokers doing some broken stuff. So I'm a little bit worried. I wonder if that's going to be survivable damage now that they're nerfing, 2 or 3 out of our healing core and not buffing the others. There is some compensation buffs here for Holy, but this is only for Lightsmith. So I wouldn't actually describe this as compensation buffs to this. I would describe this as they're buffing the hero talent that people aren't using. So Awakening now causes a Sacred Weapon when it extends the duration of wings. Hammer and Anvil's healing effect radius increased to 20 yards was 5. Hammer and Anvil's healing increased by 150%. And a Divine Guidance effect increased by 50%. All right. Then we have Prot Pally. All ability damage, 6%. Word of Glory, 20%. Now, Word of Glory is a button they've buffed already again before as well. It still feels really weak currently. Like, it feels weak in the kind of way where it feels like it's missing a 0, right? Rather than like, oh, this needs a 10 or 20%er. But, maybe that's hyperbolic. Maybe this 20% is enough to make Word of Glory start to feel good. I feel like Word of Glory just needs a massive healing increase, but only when you are the target. Because the problem with Prot Pally is if you buff Word of Glory too much, then all of a sudden we have, oh, they're dropping a healer, Prot Pally's healing everybody, right? But the side effect of that and the nerfs to Word of Glory and the Word of Glory associated talents that came in the middle of Dragonflight is that now when you cast Word of Glory on yourself, it's healing you for like 700k out of your 10 million health pool, and you're just like, all right, I'm dead, I guess. That was 3 holy power that is going to, I'm going to regret spending in this way. So yeah, I don't think it necessarily needs any more off healing buffs, but I think it needs a lot more. I'm targeting me, I need healing buffs. I think the ability just needs a double healing if it's targeting you. Claws. Light of the Titans now heals over 10 seconds, was 15, so that's a buff. Faith in the Light duration increases 6 seconds, was 5, that's a buff. And then we have some Lightsmith buffs. Sacred Weapon damage and healing, 30%. Forged Reckoning's damage, 30%. Blessed Assurance increases the damage of your next Crusader Strike, or Hammer of the Righteous, or Blessed Hammer by 200, was 100. Divine Guidance damage and healing, 50%. Hammer and Anvil, 40%. Sanctification, 2% primary stat, was 1%. That's actually quite large as well. So yeah, some large buffs here to Lightsmith. I'm not sure, but my guess is this is probably enough to make Lightsmith actually the best hero talent for Prot Pally, but I'm not 100% sure there. Ret Pally, Templar. So Ret Pally's getting some buffs specifically for Templar. Shake the Heavens lasts 2 seconds longer. Sanctification lasts 2 seconds longer. Final Reckoning, 30% damage buff instead of 15 to Hammer of Light. Hammer of Light main target damage increased by 25%. Hammer of Light secondary target damage increased by 75%. Light's Deliverance now triggers at 50 stacks, was 60. Undisputed Ruling grants 15% haste for 8 seconds, was 12% for 6 seconds. Wrathful Descent now deals 125% of Empyrean Hammer damage to nearby enemies, was 100%. And Empyrean Hammer now benefits from Penitence and Burn to Ash. Templar's a really fun hero talent tree. Oh my goodness. It's happening. The crystal. It's going shadow mode. Wow, a jump scare. Okay. All right, let me log out. This is going to be weird background noise for you guys to have. You can have the intro screen background noise instead. How's that sound? Okay. But yeah, okay. Ret Pally buffs, good. Templar buffs, good. Herald of the Sun, I don't know how far ahead it was of Templar, but Templar is a really fun hero talent tree. Herald of the Sun is really fun as well. Buffing Templar to be about equal is good. This is one of the spots where I hope it doesn't make Templar overtake Herald, because that would also constitute a net buff to Ret, a spec that I don't think necessarily needs a net buff right now. But still, I think this is something I'm happy to see. Shadow Priest. Mind Blast damage, 10%. Shadow Word Death, 10%. Void Bolt, 10%. Shadowy Apparition, 10%. So they're buffing the spec again. I think that's good. Like Resto Druid, this is another spec where this is like the 3rd week in a row where they're buffing it. And I think that's good. Realistically, this spec was not in D tier and previous tier list editions, and probably should have been, and maybe now this set of balance changes will be enough to stop that from being true. Then there are also some Voidweaver specific buffs. They're primarily playing Oracle in M+, so glad to see some love to the other hero talent tree again here as well. Entropic Rift 10%, Void Blast 20%, Collapsing Void 10%, Void Flay 10%, and Inner Quietus. Inner Quietus now increases dot damage by 25, was 20%. Good. Glad to see these buffs for Shadow. Shadow isn't that far behind, but it was noticeably behind, so good to see it getting some more love here. Rogue. Caustic Spatter AoE damage reduced to 40%, was 45. The 2 set is going to get a proc rate increase. It now also correctly affects Envenom, Kingsbane, and Hero Talents. And then the 4 set now also correctly applies on 5 stacks instead of 6, so that's a bug fix. We expect these changes to result in a net increase in overall damage, weighted heavily towards single target, because these are buffs. This is especially a single target buff. And this is an AoE nerf that they think will be offset in AoE by these. Makes sense? Sin Rogue already good. Buffs, good. I mean, the spec definitely... Sin Rogue is like... It's good in the sense of you're playing a rogue spec. What's a good one, right? Like, I'm playing rogue, I want to play a rogue spec in raid. Often I would choose Assassination. It's nice to see them making it even... You know, like, nobody ever really seriously considered playing multiple rogues, I think, during this tier's Race to World First, or, like, Hall of Fame progression guilds, unless you just had 2 insane rogues, right? And I think this will help make that maybe Assassination's like, okay, this spec's actually not just the best rogue spec, but just a good spec. That's a good thing for it to be. Outlaw, getting buffed here. All ability damage 4%, dispatch 6%, and precise cuts bonus to blade flurry damage per missing target increased to 4%, was 2%. So this is a spec I think actually took a nerf a few weeks ago. And it looks like it's sort of getting buffed back up. This was a spec that was a huge overperformer on Heroic. But let's see, is that still true? No, that's kind of stopped being true. It was an overperformer in the first few weeks of Heroic, though. Let's see. I guess we can't really look. Going back the entire tier. Yeah, you can see, okay. You can see from the start of the tier, Outlaw was like second place there, and it's had this sort of chart with downward trend thing going on, probably after it got nerfed. But also just, it had a pretty weak set bonus, so it didn't scale particularly well into its set bonus. Same with Fury Warrior, right? These 2 specs had really weak set bonuses. And then, yeah, it also just it does not scale very well at all. Like, people very rarely are playing it in Mythic. If we look at the number of parses, Outlaw is down there with, it's the second least popular, just ahead of Serve Hunter in terms of number of parses. So, that is, I think, good to give it a little bit of a buff. It's historically a spec that, if it's close between Outlaw, Sin, or Sub, Outlaw is the spec you basically would never use in Mythic, if that's true, because it's like more fiddly, more variance from pull to pull, less cooldown based, so there's a lot of fights where that just ends up being less good, and yeah, more punishing for downtime on, so I'm happy to see it getting buffed here. Shaman. Our Shaman. Earth and Harmony now causes Earth Shield to reduce damage taken by 3%, was 5. Does not affect PvP combat, and Acid Rain damage reduced by 20%. So Shaman's in a tough spot where our Shaman doesn't need nerfs in Raid. It's in a good spot in Raid. But it does need nerfs in M+. So this is, I think, attempting to accomplish both of those things. Like, or it's nerfing it in M+, without like targeting specifically things that make it good in M+. The problem is that a lot of what makes it good in M+ is also stuff where if you nerf it, it's going to hurt them in Raid. So I'm not sure what their best way to go about fixing that is. Earthshield is definitely a good target, though, for sure. Warlock. Demo. Pact of the Air Druid, Demon Guard, deal 20% increased damage. Grimoire increases the damage of the summoned Felguard by 60, was 45. Felguard damage up by 10%. And Gloomhound's damage increased by 20%. Another week of demo buffs, rather. Will it be enough to make it a competitive option with the other Warlock specs? I mean, it really wasn't that far behind. So probably, yeah, this is probably good. There'll probably be some demo fights after these buffs, would be my guess. Warrior. So we have some hero talent changes to all 3 hero talent trees. Colossus is getting buffed. Arterial Bleed causes Colossal Might to increase the damage dealt by deep wounds and rend by 3% per stack, was 2%. No Stranger to Pain increases total damage ignored by Ignore Pain by 20%, was 15%. Mountain Thane. Lightning Strikes damage up. Ground Current damage up. Thorum's Might causes Lightning Strikes to generate less rage, though. Slayer, getting nerfed here. Culling Cyclone, bonus Blade Storm damage reduced to 10%, was 20. Opportunist now increases damage and critical strike of your next overpowered Raging Blow by 20, was 30. Okay. Now this is the main hero talent tree being used by both Fury and Arms. So this is DPS Warrior nerfs here. Fury, the 2 set is now getting buffed. Bloodthirst increases the damage of your next rampage by 15%, was 10. And the 4 set is also getting buffed. It's giving you double now the value on damage of your next Bloodthirst. Mountain Thane is also getting buffed. Crashing Thunder just for Fury causes Thunderclap to generate 8 rage, was 5. Strength of the Mountain increases Bloodthirst and Rampage by 30, was 20. And Thorm's Might increases Raging Blow and Execute damage by 25, was 15. So they're trying to nerf Fury AoE without hurting their single target too much, I think is what's going on here. And they're trying to nerf Slayer and also buff Mountain Thane. But on net, I think this ends up just being a little bit of an AoE nerf for Fury. Also, interestingly, an AoE nerf for Arms. Unless maybe now you can play Colossus for Arms. Maybe. This is probably not enough to make that true, but maybe. And then Prot also, we've got Mountain Thane Thunderblast generating 8 rage, was 10. So this is a slight nerf to Mountain Thane Prot, but note that Mountain Thane Prot is getting buffed in damage up here. It's a second rage gen nerf for Mountain Thane Prot, though. I think maybe Colossus Prot is going to be the vibe now. I always thought Colossus Prot was cool, though, and pretty good, and it's just getting straight up buffed. Mountain Thane, one of the biggest selling points of it was that it had a lot of extra rage generation, and these are both nerfs to that, so I'm not sure. Interesting. Overall, I think I applaud the Mountain Thane changes. I applaud the Colossus changes. I think they need to do some more stuff with Fury to buff their single target. And then nerfing their AoE a little bit more is okay. Its AoE is still very good. But the single target definitely needs to be... Like, the single target is very bad from Fury right now. If we look at damage to bosses, for instance... Fury is already the worst spec in the game at that metric. Although Arms, pretty good. Now, Arms is, I guess, getting, again, nerfed slightly by this change. Again, unless maybe these buffs for Colossus. I guess this buff for Colossus. Probably not, but maybe. And then there's some PvP changes. We're not going to look at those, but PvP is also getting changes, so that's good. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.